We've talked a lot about controls. We've talked about HTML controls and web controls and server controls and ASP.NET HTML controls. With all those out there, how do we select the right control to use? First of all, understand this does not have to be a hard static choice on every page. You can mix and match these things at will on a page. The Microsoft best practice here is to avoid the HTML server controls. They're going to suggest that you use web controls, and these are those controls that have that ASP prefix on them for a lot of reasons. Number one, there's a lot more functionality built into those things. Number two, they're extremely smart. They handle client and server-side issues automatically for you. I've already mentioned these controls pay attention to the HTTP headers that requested their page, and based on those headers, they know how to render themselves back in the appropriate version of HTML to work for whatever browser and browser version that requested them. So Microsoft's going to suggest you use the web controls. Now, let's back up, because in a perfect Microsoft world, we'd always use web controls, but you've probably noticed in your little neighborhood there that it's not a perfect Microsoft world. So you can use the HTML server controls, and these are just standard HTML controls that have the run at server attribute set. And we want to use these when we prefer an HTML object model, when we want to program based on HTML, very similar to DHTML. And this is a quick conversion of our standard HTML controls. Now, I can take any text box that's in standard HTML and give it server-side functionality, if you remember, just simply by typing run at equals server in the attributes. And this causes all processing to happen on the server. Also, I would want to use these server controls when I have limited bandwidth. That means that I need to do as much client-side functionality as I can. It just takes too long, or it's too involved, or too expensive from a resource standpoint to go back to the server over and over and over again. So these will work well there. Now, web controls, when do I want to use those? When I want to use the Visual Basic Programming Model. And this is one of the biggest advantages to these things. There are a lot of VB programmers out there, and one of the things Microsoft tried to do is make it real easy for those programmers to move over into the web environment. They've done an excellent job using Visual Studio.NET to make building a web page almost identical to building a VB6 application. We put our HTML, we drag our controls in, they create the HTML, but we do most of what we do in that code behind page where we're writing code based on events and creating events and so forth. The web controls support a variety of browsers. Finally, we're out of that business of having to write multiple web pages and then checking headers to see what's coming in to see how to render these things. These controls do an excellent job of doing that themselves. What you're actually doing every time you drop a control onto a web form and begin to use it, you have in essence dropped a number of similar controls on that form, because these things are going to render themselves differently based on what's asking for them. Web controls also give us specific functionality. If you remember, for example, the validator controls, these give us a lot of functionality, specific functionality that we need with very few lines of code being written. And also you can set most of these properties at design time by choosing items out of drop-down lists and so forth. Also, calendar, add, rotator, pretty specific functionalities that are in there. Again, if you need calendar functions, that's the way to get it. Now, with web controls, there is one thing you do need to be concerned about at all times, and that is these things' functionality comes directly from their ability to go back to the web server. And so you have to make sure that you've got the bandwidth. You're not going to want to use a whole lot of web controls doing a whole lot of stuff going back across dial-up lines, because obviously that's going to take a little while and your web page is going to get a little slower and a little clunkier feeling. But we already know how to use auto post back to determine when things go back and how often they go back. But when you don't have any bandwidth limitations, then it's kind of hard to make the case for using anything but a web control. So keep that in mind. So that's just a real quick guide, an overall view of when to use certain controls. And again, let me reiterate. Best practice, use web controls. Ask yourself one question. Do I have bandwidth limitations? or do I have high bandwidth? If I don't, then the answer on controls is web control. If I have any sort of bandwidth limitations, then I have to leave the web control solution and have to start using other controls and working with my post-back properties or just going client side. So hope this helps. Again, you got a lot to choose from in your toolbox. Pull out what you need, mix and match, build the application that performs what you need.